Hey, what is going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Battlefield Project podcast. I'm your host, Matthew Rhoda, and we are the podcast for people who understand that life is a battle and only the strong will thrive. I'm joined by my good friend here, Kevin, who I'm going to introduce in a moment. But before I do, let me do the housekeeping like I always do at the beginning. If you're listening to this or watching this and you get any value out of it, and or you think you know someone that would get some value out of this, please share the show with them. The entire intent and purpose behind this show is basically for me to invite guests on here who are authentic, willing, and vulnerable enough to share some of the battles that they've had to face in their life, and then how and why they fought their way through those battles and then came out stronger on the other side. Because I want everybody out there to understand that no one goes through life untouched. Every single human being walking this earth has battles, will have battles, or had battles that they've had to face. And the difference between the people winning in life and losing in life, the winners fight their way through those battles, knowing that it's just part of the deal. And they come out stronger on the other side. So my hope and intent is to inspire all of you out there with the guests that I'm fortunate enough to have on the show and listen to them share their stories and kind of the value that they have in their lives and why they fought their way through those battles. So without further ado, I've got my buddy Kevin here, who is the owner and founder of 3B Credit Health. He struggled his entire life to get his life together. After decades of bouncing from job to job, Kevin finally had enough at the age of 50. After reading the book, The 3% Man, Kevin knew if he was ever going to love himself, he needed a purpose. That's when he founded 3B Credit Health, a credit restoration company that he started with an iPhone and a $50 printer. Just a few short years later, his company has helped hundreds of families restore their buying power and regain opportunity with newfound credit. He is proof at the age of 52 that it is never too late to find yourself and have the life that you dream of. I love the bio, man. I love your story. I'm super glad that we're connected on social media. I love the content that you put out there, the inspiration that you provide, the help that you give the family. So I'm honored to have you here, man. And I'm excited to hear your story.
Yeah, man. Dude, thanks for having me, man. I'm excited. I'm
My
excited to have
sincere
a good
pleasure, man.
conversation with you. It's been a minute, man, since
It
we've
has.
talked.
I
So
say I feel like it was right when I joined Apex. You're one of the first people that I talked to like this on a Zoom, and I think it was actually when you were doing 75 hard, and I was about to start 75 hard up. So right away, I was like, all right, I like this guy. Like anybody that's doing 75 hard is a good guy in my books and someone I want to follow. So I appreciate the connection, man. I'm excited to hear what battles that you faced in your life as well.
yeah, man, it's been an interesting story, dude. It really has, man. I always have had I've always been a good guy, man. I just didn't have confidence. And it held me down for decades, that I never could. I was so scared of people, man. That was whenever I look back on it, I was just so they say, man, I talk to a lot of these experts and people that are really mindset, professionals, and man, they all kind of think that or say that it all comes from when we're children, is when a lot of this stuff is ingrained in us. And I can't remember back anything specific because I had a great childhood. I mean, I was raised, by great parents. I was raised in church. I was really taught. Honestly, a lot of people have really bad stories, man. I had a really, really good upbringing by good people. And man, I have struggled with some mental illness, and we can get into a lot of that bipolar and so forth. And so that created an identity that dogged me for decades. And then from there, confidence snowballed because the bad gains momentum and takes off on us just like the good does.
Yep.
So the key there is to interrupt that pattern and figure out how to stop your life from going the wrong way and reverse it, and then have patience with it as you start gaining momentum the right way, and then that will snowball as well. And
Yeah.
man, God's blessed me, man. I'm very grateful. I've been very fortunate for it to start snowballing in the right direction.
Yeah. It's interesting cosmically aligned, like divine timing that you said that, because I was just having a conversation with a buddy yesterday and it was along the lines of that subject. That's like we all experience wins and losses in life, but for whatever reason, it's like the devil and the losses are what the for me, like the tape that I replay more often, and then the wins happen. And it's kind of like that was to be expected. Like, of course that should happen. So it's like move on to the next thing. Where's my next one coming from? So those wins are happening, but I don't focus on them enough, and I kind of just take them for granted in some ways. And then when those little losses happen, they turn into big losses, and it plays over and over again, and it's a snowball effect and it's the momentum. And I'm now, I'm 40, and in the last 3 months, maybe six, but I feel like really like 3 months, I'm finally like really training my mind to recognize when that's happening and to put a stop to it as quickly as humanly possible, because it's like that's where I'm not delusional enough to think that I can say like meditate, pray, do good work, etc., and say those thoughts are never going to happen again, because I've gotten to a good point. Like those thoughts are always going to happen. That's part of the human like experience. So I'm not going to try to block them from happening. I'm going to accept the fact that they're going to come into me, but I want them to go through me as quick as humanly possible, and then recognize it and be like, okay, that's done. Like that's not my reality. And then look at a win and just like pat myself on the back and be like, that's what I want to focus on. That's what I want to constantly feed into my consciousness, because then that snowball gets bigger and bigger and bigger and moves faster and faster and faster. But it's hard, man. It's extremely difficult to do.
That awareness, man, will take you to great heights of understanding that you when so for me, let's go this way with it.
Yeah.
So when I figured out that everybody, I talked about my confidence issues that I have,
Mm-hmm.
and where I made the turn in life was whenever I understood that we're all the same. So it doesn't matter if you're talking about somebody that makes multi-millions of dollars, you're talking about an 8-figure earner, you're talking about a 9-figure earner. It does not matter. It's the same as a person that makes $30,000 a year. We all have these same issues. We're all just humans. And what we tend to do is we do tend to think about the negative things and not give ourselves credit for the positive. And then when we can recognize that's what's going on and get ourselves back on track,
Mm-hmm.
that's when the momentum starts, man. And that does require a lot of self awareness.
Yeah. That's what I said to my buddy. I was like, it takes a lot of inner work to get to that point. Like it's not just like you read a book, a paragraph in a book, and you're like, oh, that makes sense. And poof, it all of a sudden like you're recognizing those negative patterns and stopping them. Like I mean, it'll probably always be a work in progress, I would imagine. Like it's something that once you get that awareness, now you got to like cultivate it, nurture it, strengthen it, so you're quicker to recognize those negative thoughts and patterns that are happening, so you can stop them quicker. And that's where I think success and momentum merge into one, and all of a sudden you're living this great life that obviously still has obstacles and struggles and battles with it, but living a really good life because you've trained your mind to almost just accept the good. And like when the bad comes, which it will, it's like karate chop, like get out of here, like you don't serve my purpose, like I don't need you around me, and you get right back into that winning mindset. But yeah, it's a lot of work. It's not a quick fix.
People think that boundaries, man, only apply to like outside exterior, to the
Correct.
people you're hanging out with. And while that's true, and it really does matter who you're hanging out with in a big time way, it's more about or as much about what your boundaries with yourself and
Mm-hmm.
what you'll tolerate for yourself, as far as where you'll let your mindset go, and what you can train your brain.
Yeah. Yep. So you said growing up, and it's almost like a repeat conversation in some different ways. I said to my buddy, I grew up with like such a blessed upbringing, and he was kind of asking like because I went from like all-star athlete, seventh, eighth grade, to druggy in high school, college, after college, and like 20 years of my life, I just kind of tossed to the wind and like lost my clarity, my purpose and stuff. And I always said like, I feel like, how did I get to that point? Because I had such a beautiful upbringing, like two loving parents, raised in a church, like great middle class home, neighborhood friends that were all playing like basketball outside till dark. Like I had like the ideal upbringing. And then I talked to a lot of people on this podcast that are like absent fathers, divorced parents, like abused physically, mentally, like all these like traumas that happened at a young age. And I'm like, holy crap. And it makes me realize like how blessed I was. But then I'm like, so how do I go from like that super blessed to like just not throwing it all away, but in a way, kind of throwing it all away. So it's refreshing in some ways to hear you say like, yeah, I had a beautiful upbringing, and like, I was blessed in that, because sometimes I feel like I'm this outsider being like, am I the only human being that had like almost like a perfect upbringing? And I feel guilty in some ways because I had that and still threw it away. And like now I'm back to winning and like back to the right lifestyle and all that stuff in the last 5, 6, 7 years. But it's amazing to think how hard some people had it and then compare that to how good we've had it. So that, all that being said, what was it that like caused you to lack confidence? Because it sounds like your parents probably poured into you and like gave you the tools and the foundation to like go out and thrive. What was the disconnect then that kind of had you, like you mentioned, for a while living that life of like doubt and kind of self-confidence lacked and all that good stuff?
It's a great question, man, and I'll answer it like this. What I was talking about a minute ago about the 7, 8, 9 figure earners have the same problems as the 5 figure earners. It's the same. We all have the same issues. And my parents, man, while they were good people, I learned so much from them about ethics and about keeping your word. They still were people. So my mom, man, when I look back now, I see that she didn't have a lot of confidence, and she struggled with that her whole life. And so when you have somebody that doesn't have a lot of confidence raising someone, we're a product of our environment. So that's where a lot of it came from. And then on top of that, to add to that, when I started having the struggles with the bipolar disorder and depression and things like that, I had trouble keeping jobs. I had trouble doing things like that. So there were a lot of compounding things that started happening, and then that created an identity that I accepted for myself and embraced.
Yeah.
And then got caught in that for years. So, for the listener out there that's in that situation, as you hear this story today and us talk about this and unpack all of this, whatever you're going through right now, it's not necessarily who you are. You don't have to stay there. You can change, you can flip that script. It sounds like a cliche, but it isn't. And as we walk through this and reverse engineer this and then build it back up, you're going to see that. I mean, I was 50, bro. I was 50 years old when I turned this thing around, man. When I signed up for Apex, which is the mastermind you and I are in, dude, I barely had the $500. I really didn't have it. I had a laptop that didn't work. And my wife had told me she wanted to get divorced because I just wasn't going anywhere in life. And so she had no reason to move forward with me, because she's like, the question she had to answer was, do I want to move forward with this?
Yeah.
This is just BS, man. I can't move forward with my life with this dude.
Yep.
And so I'm in a 1-bedroom apartment that has 2 mattresses on the floor. I have a desk and I have my laptop, and the laptop wasn't working. And I had a call set up with one of the recruiters from the mastermind that we're in. And I'm like, man, I saw when you called, I was like, man, I know who that is. I don't want to even take this call because it might make me do something I'm not comfortable with. But I knew I wanted to make a change with my life. I knew I just couldn't do this anymore. And I knew that I had to turn the corner. I knew that I had to change. It finally hit me, man, that I had to change myself, or it was never going to change. So my wife, Kelly, at that point, I wasn't even thinking about reconciling with her, because I was just like, I don't know what I can do here. That's where that book 3% Man comes in. But I was like, man, I've just got to change myself. I've got to focus on me. And man, from there, that's when that corner changed. But it was about understanding that it was not my wife's fault. It was not the job's fault. It was not the community I lived in's fault. It was my fault. I had to change me, and then we could start making some progress.
Dude, I got angel bumps there hearing you say that, because that's powerful, man. Because you're in that situation where your wife's like thinking about divorce, and you kind of start having that sink into your reality of like, oh crap, I could lose this relationship. So many people that aren't ready to change and aren't like wired to truly change would go into like panic mode at that point and do everything they could to impress your wife, to earn her validation. Like it would be like all energy is poured into like, what can I do to make them love me again? And like that's the solution, because like they don't love me. Like I got to fix that so they'll stay with me. And that's probably why 90% of those situations end in divorce, I would guess, because no true resolution comes of that because they can't change you. So like the fact that you were kind of like your feet were in the fire per se in that moment, and instead of going into panic mode, like how can I get her to love me again, like you being wise and intuitive enough to be like, okay, this sucks, but like I gotta fix me. Like I gotta get me right, because if that doesn't happen first and foremost, then we can never be right because I'm still not right. That's a Was that a conscious, like, so I'm interested, I think I know the answer to this. Was that like a conscious decision, or kind of just like you did it without even thinking about it? And then my follow-up question to that is, did the book The 3% Man play into that equation at all?
So here's what happened. I'm laying on the couch, man, and this goes on for months, man. I don't know. Let's call it a year. I don't know
Yeah.
exactly how long,
Yeah.
man. I mean, this is 2020, by the way, so COVID's going on, right? We're all in a
Yeah.
everything's in a spin. So I know, man, that I ain't doing right, man. I know I'm not taking care of my business. I knew, man, that I knew
Yeah.
I wasn't doing right. And my coach, man, Stacy Rasky's my coach, and she actually fronted me out on this because, and she, correctly, she said, it wasn't that your wife left you, it was that you never showed up. And she was so right, man.
Yeah.
So I knew, man, that it wasn't going right. So she finally has enough, and she comes home and says, it's very hard for her, man. She says, I can't do this. I need us to, go our separate ways. And so I live in Waco, Texas, and picture Texas, the state of Texas, and where the heart is on the state of Texas,
Yeah.
and that's where Waco is. It's called the heart of Texas. Waco
Okay.
is, and so down the interstate about an hour, I had a best friend, and I went to stay with my best friend. I stayed in his back room, and I had my head so far buried in the sand at this point that I just didn't understand, because I was still in denial what had happened here. I didn't know. So I start watching YouTube videos, and I'm trying to understand women, because I wanted to know what my wife was thinking. And so I'm watching these videos, and I stumble across this guy called Corey Wayne, who's a dating coach. So that's how he started out. Now he's more of a life coach. You can check him out on YouTube. I wasn't interested in the dating aspect of it. It just wasn't. I was separated. I was heartbroken. I was not in a place for dating at that point in my life at all.
Yeah.
But I was interested in learning the psychology of how women work, and what women think, and what
Yeah.
women expect, and what women need. And I just wanted to understand that. So he had a book called The 3% Man. And I liked his videos, his content. So I ordered this book, and I get it. And in this book, and by the way, this is the best nugget you're going to hear on this podcast from me today, is he said, read that book 12 to 13 times minimum until you can talk about it on stage.
Mm-hmm.
And I did that. And we'll go into this on the back half of this, but that's how I ended up getting into credit repair and building my business as well, because I learned that skill about how to read a book
Yeah.
and turn a book into what you want it needed to be. But so anyway, back to 3% Man. So I read this book, and this book he teaches, he said, you need a purpose. Women, first of all, women want a man with a purpose. They want you to know who you are. That's what attracts women. It's some biology stuff. That's just what we all need, right? So you have to have a role, and you have to know what your role is. So my attitude was, man, was if I've got to find a purpose in life, and this is out of my control, whether she accepts me or takes me back or we get back together. I have no idea. I cannot control that. But what I can control is I can make sure this never happens again to me. Yep. And that I come out of this a better person. And I told her, and I told her, we had a marriage counselor at the time, and I told them both. I said, I don't know what's going to happen here. This is out of my control, but I'm coming out of this a better person.
Yeah.
And I'm going to figure out what I did wrong here, and it's never going to happen again. So it was either just keeping it real. What was going on in my mind at the time was either God doesn't want me to end up with this person, and this was just a thing in my life, or there's more for me out there somewhere. So, in order for me to achieve that, I've got to become better. And that can translate into whatever you want out of life, how you have to approach it.
Yeah.
But so I read this book 12 to 13 times, just like the author said, and I learned. And so that gave me the discipline, because he said in that book, do not bother her. If you're trying to win a woman back, or you're trying to do anything, leave them alone. Go build what you're going to go build.
Yeah.
And he's sitting back watching that whole time, watching this. And that's when I started 3B Credit Health. That's when I started my business. That's when, in the intro, we talked about my bio, the iPhone and the $50 printer. And I just concentrated on that, man.
Did you have experience in that industry prior to that, or that was like a random one you just picked and went for it? Now you're crushing it.
Yeah, I had watched a guy, man, that lived in Pennsylvania, man, and he social media, so I really had no idea, but it appeared like he was doing well with the credit repair business, and he offered a very organic Facebook ad. He said, I'm teaching credit repair to anybody that wants to learn it, and I think the deal was like $500.
Yeah.
And you can learn this. And I'm like, man, I'm in my buddy's back room. I had it was actually a full-time job, but it was about 30 hours a week working. I was the guy that sold at Home Depot, that comes up to you and says, sold kitchen and bathroom remodels.
Yep.
So, you had those random people come up to you. I was that dude.
Okay.
And so that's what I was doing, man. And actually I used that job to learn a lot about discipline too, because I taught myself. I would go write down, like when I would walk up to a complete stranger in Home Depot and they would shoot me down or whatever, I would document exactly why or what happened. And then if it worked and I ended up getting an appointment for us to come to their house, I would go write down exactly what happened there. Yeah. And then that's how I ended up figuring out what worked. And I ended up becoming really good at that job.
Yeah.
And I changed that over into credit repair when I started working on building my own business, my own company. Yeah. And that's how things ended up going.
Philosophies and yeah.
Yeah.
I love that nugget of, and you even said that here's the best nugget I'm going to give. And I'm like, yeah, I would agree with you, to read a book 12 or 13 times until you can speak on stage about it. I just read a book, Jeff G. He's in Apex. Jeff, I always screw his last name, Jacneveau or Jacneveau. Yeah. He'd hate me for screwing that up and chopping it up as bad as I did. But he sent me a book probably like a month or two ago, and I read it. And it's the mustard seed, the shovel in the mountain, or something like that. And it's thin. It's it's pretty small. And I read it, and I was underlining some stuff, which I do with most of my books, is I read it and I underline. But then usually I finish the book and I put it away. And I think some of the book sticks with me and changes my life and has an impact. But I'm not overly intentional about taking lessons from a book and absorbing it to the point where I know for sure it's affecting me. It's kind of just I read a great book, and one, I'd let one power of one more, yeah, definitely I understand, go one more and do, I get it. But this book, I read it, and now I'm going back through it a second time with all the stuff that I underlined, and I'm journaling it and writing it out. And it's going to be something that I read probably a third and fourth time, because it's one of those books that I'm like, holy crap, it opened my eyes. But I'm like, if I don't really intentionally keep my eyes open to what I just learned, my eyes are going to get distracted with the next book, the next message, and that'll still be part of my subconscious. But I want the lessons that I learned from this book to be at the forefront of my consciousness and changing my daily actions, and it's going to project me in a totally different reality. But I think that's something, whether it's the 3% Man, it's the book I just mentioned, whatever book it is, I feel like people read books just to say, hey, I read 12 books last year, or read books, be I read 24, I can read 36 books in in 3 months. And it's kudos to you, but what did you get out of that book? So I've stopped setting those goals of how many books can I read this year? If I read one book per year, for the year, but I read it 12 times and I live and breathe the message that it was meant to share and meant to impact me, I would take that over 12 books that I couldn't recite anything that I learned out of them.
The key there, man, is be very selective about the book that you pick, and pick something that goes with what you're dealing with in life.
Yeah.
So and that was a great hint that you just gave a second ago. If it resonates with you right now,
Yeah.
and it really lands, that's telling, because a lot of people out there are going, well, I don't know. I
Yeah.
don't know where I am in life. And if it's something that you just fall in love with and you're like, this, man, I love this book, I'm getting so much out of this book,
Yeah.
then that's one you want to turn into a manual. That's one you want to read it 12, 13 times and just mark it up, man, until the pages are falling out of it,
Yeah.
and
Yep.
learn that thing until you can speak on stage about it. And then, when you learn a little bit of marketing, you have a career there.
Yeah. That's an awesome. Yeah. The one thing you said a little while ago, which I want to bring back up and kind of drill home here towards the end before, is identity and how you get to choose your identity. Because I was on a podcast yesterday and that's what I talked about. My story was like my identity from young kid to 12 or 13 was, all-star athlete, basketball, baseball. Then I made a left turn where I should have made a right turn in life. And my identity for 15, 20 years was, Matt who can get the drugs and is a party guy and has the car and like picks us all up and drives us around. And that was the identity that I chose, that I just chose to have for 15, 20 years. And then I met my now wife and she was kind of like, that's not good enough for me. Like, if you want to like be with me and marry me, like you got to like be the better version of you and not this version of you. And praise God, thank God I made that choice where I was like, okay, like you're what I want. So if that requires me like picking a new identity and morphing back into my winning identity, here we go and let's do it. And I've been like heading down that path now stronger than ever. But the point of that was like yesterday, the guy said like it's hard to change identities, isn't it? And kind of be lonely at times. And I was like, absolutely. Like when you lose part of who you think you are, that's lonely. And then usually part of that identity is attached to other people. So now to like create a new identity, you got to get rid of those people out of your life because they don't serve your new identity. So now you're ending relationships. So it is a difficult thing to do, but it's extremely possible. And for anyone listening that's like, I don't like where I'm in life right now. I hate my job, or I'm just not healthy and active and fit and I want to be, or my relationship with my significant other sucks, or my kids aren't growing up to be the people that I want to, like whatever that is, like you got to look in the mirror and be like, okay, all that is happening because of the identity that like I'm choosing for myself and seeing myself as, and because of that identity, I've created this life that serves that identity. I don't want this or that or whatever it is anymore. Like you said with your wife in that conversation, like I got to go in myself now and do a whole lot of work and choose what I want to be and who I want to be. And once that identity shift starts happening, then the like external elements in your life will accommodate that new identity and serve the purpose of the new identity you created. So it's very, very difficult to do. But in my opinion, and correct me if I'm wrong here, I think it's more difficult to live a life, for the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years with an identity that you're not waking up happy with. Like that to me, that's hell on earth. Like to put it bluntly, I'd rather struggle for 1 or 2 years to create that new identity, but have 10 or 20 years of like happiness ahead of me than be like, oh, it's going to suck. It's going to be really hard. I don't know if I could do it. Throw in the towel, I'm not doing it. And now I'm 40 now, and at 80, I'm like, I just lived 40 years of my life unhappy because I never chose a new identity for myself.
So in sales, man, when you let's unpack this a little bit. In sales, when you sell somebody something, the ideal person that you're selling to, they have to be in pain. So
Mhm.
they have to really be going through, sick of dealing with it. And that goes to my credit repair business. When I deal with somebody, the ideal person that I want to work with is somebody that's had such a problem. They're like, man, I want my family to have a house, and I am tired of working my butt off and paying so much for interest, and I'm just done with it. I'm going to do the work on my end, Kevin. You do the work on your end, and let's get me in the position where I can put this to bed forever. And they're just sick of it. And that's how this advice is going to land, because it's going to land. Most people will not be in enough pain to take this advice I'm about to give. When my wife and I separated and I was in that empty apartment, I was in that kind of pain. And what I did was I got that book, 3% Man. I started reading it 12 to 13 times, and I separated myself from life, man. I was alone for the entire 7 months that my wife and I were separated. Now, I was building my business, but I wasn't spending any time with friends. I wasn't spending any time. It was just me and my dog, man.
Yeah.
And that was pretty much it. But that time period is when I did the massive amounts of growth for myself. And that's when I really figured out who I was and who I wanted. And that requires a ton of discipline. And like I said, there might be 1 out of 100 people that listen to this podcast that are in enough pain to cause them to do that, to where they'll say, okay, I'm fine with going and spending 6 months on my own and reading a book 12 to 13 times and changing my life. And that's the person that is going to change their life from this podcast.
Yeah.
That person will forever remember this podcast because they're going to go do what we're teaching them how to do right now.
Yeah.
And so when you do that and you spend that 6 to 7 months and you go really learn who you are, that's when you start building back the pieces of your life. Now, this doesn't mean you have to go isolate yourself. I don't have kids. Obviously, my wife didn't want me in her life at that point in time. So it made sense for me to be by myself. But you can do this with a family. You can do this with your kids. You can do this with your wife. That's just you grabbing the people that you know you want to move forward with and doing the work on yourself to carry them to the life that they deserve.
Yeah.
And use them as the fuel for you to take that hour to 2 hours a night and read that book and do that work on yourself so that you guys, all of you as a unit, as a family, can move forward with your life. And I promise you, at the end of that 6 to 7 months, when you know who you are. You've got your family moving in a positive direction. Now you can start adding the pieces to your life to rebuild with the kind of life that you want to rebuild, you want to live in.
I'm so glad you said that, because as you're sharing your story and you're like, I was in my buddy's, back apartment by myself. I'm thinking, okay, there's gonna be people that are hearing this. They're gonna be like, I can't just like go by myself for 6 months because like I have kids, or I have, my job doesn't allow me to travel. Like I got to travel for my job, or I've got to like all the million excuses that are legitimate reasons why they can't do exactly what you did. But you nailed it, man. When you could do this if like, and to your point of like, you have to be in enough pain. They have to be in enough pain. Like if you're in enough pain, you will not have a problem waking up at 3 a.m., 5 days a week to get 2 hours of reading in before your kids wake up at 5, or your wife wakes up at 5, or, wake up at 4, they're up at 6, whatever that looks like. And, at night you get your kids to bed, or, your wife's back and you're like, hey, sweet, or like, I'm going to go work on myself. I'm going to go downstairs and read for 2 hours. And instead of going to bed at 10, you're in bed at midnight because you spent 2 hours working on yourself. Like there's ample time in a day when you prioritize certain stuff. If you make something a priority, and that's a choice. So for people that are, listening, it's like, well, I don't have time to, sounds great. I want to change my identity. I want to build myself up. I want to create a better life for my family, my future, but I don't have time. Excuses. Like you will find time, you will cut out stuff in your life that doesn't serve you, that's not creating that identity. 2 hours of Netflix every night, kill it. And, go into go into meditation, read books, have conversations with a coach, like whatever that looks like to pull you forward and to move you forward. Find and make the time to do that for yourself, because we all have the same the cliche, we all have the same 24 hours in a day. We literally all do. It's how you're utilizing that time and what purpose are you serving with the utilization of that time. If it's just to keep you stuck where you are, then you're probably not in enough pain, and you might just coast through life like that for the next 20 years of like almost in enough pain, but not quite. And you're just going to be kind of content, comfortable, and unhappy for the rest of your life. I wouldn't wish it upon anybody, but to those that choose that, so be it. But if you're in that spot where you're like, no, I really want to change, I just don't know how, or like I can't, find time, connect with other people who've either been there or are currently going through it, and just like grow with each other. But more than anything, like do the inner work, internal work, and you'll come out stronger on the other side.
Absolutely, man. And pain, man, it found me. I mean,
Yeah.
I didn't find, I was hurting so bad, dude. One night that when I went, I said I had this friend that was an hour down I explained where Waco was in the heart of Texas. And then we were about an hour away. And when I went and stayed in his back room, like I'd been there maybe that first night, maybe the second night, I had a complete meltdown, man. I mean, I'm sitting there, dude, to the point And he's trying to be nice, but I had known this guy since the second grade, and so he knows, man, that I'm spitting truth at
Yeah.
this point. And he didn't want to agree with me because I'm sure he felt awkward because,
Yeah.
dude, I'm crying from head to toe, man. I mean, I'm having a complete meltdown, and I'm saying, man, this is never going to get better. It's my fault. I'm responsible for this. And that was my come to reality meeting about, okay, I've got to take ownership of this. I've got to take accountability with this. It's never going to get better until I get better. But man, I was actually gonna commit suicide, dude. I was gonna, I had a plan and everything, man.
Yeah.
And so what he did was he heard me have that meltdown at his kitchen table, and he texted, three or four other buddies of mine in a group text, and I don't know what he said to this day. I don't know what he said to him. I think he just said, "Hey, bro's having a meltdown. We got
Yeah.
to circle around him." And they start texting me the next day, and that's what kept me alive, man.
Yeah.
And dude, I'll say that to say this. Do you think I cared about reaching out once I said, okay, I've got to read this book. I want to build this business. I'm going to change my life because I had this reality meeting. Do you think I cared? I had no money. I wasn't in my home anymore. My wife had said, get lost. I'm staying in a buddy's back room at 50 years old. Do you think I cared about reaching out to a client and saying, do you mind if I help you get your credit where you need it to be?
Yeah.
I didn't care in the least bit, man.
Yeah.
Not even a little bit. I would lay on the floor. I went and got an apartment after I left my buddy's place because I couldn't stay there forever. And I laid on the floor and would text people until Facebook would shut me, or friend request people and DM
Yeah.
people until Facebook would force me would cut me off from
Yeah.
sending friend requests for the day, man. I would do that like while I was building my business, but it was all
Yeah.
because, man, I just had enough.
Yeah.
I'd had enough. And when you've had enough and you really want your life to change for your family, and I don't know, man, because I don't have kids. So I really don't know what that's like. But from the conversations I have with people, and when you have a family and you want for these kids, man, you're the person that you love to have more than what you had, man, that's your motivation to go make this stuff happen, And
Yeah.
actually, I think that's why I didn't have the motivation, because I didn't have a family or whatever, and it kind of gave me permission to go through life screwing up, dude.
Yeah. Less pressure, like a little bit of like less external pressure. Maybe not internal is
And,
the
and,
same,
and
but
no incentive, man, to move, because
do something great.
I didn't have kids that I was coming home to looking at me going, what are we eating, Dad? I just didn't
Yeah.
have that.
Yeah. Now I can tell you from experience, man, having kids, it'll give you that. It's like for me personally right now, it's like I want to be able to take a vacation with my family like whenever we want. Like, and right now we're not quite there financially. It's kind of like, does it make sense financially? Does it not? And like those are the conversations we have. And I'm like, you know what? Like we have food all the time. We have a beautiful house. Like we have all the other stuff. I'm like, I want to work like extra hard because like when we come back, we had a vacation a couple weeks ago, and one kid, our oldest, was sick the whole time, and it didn't feel like a vacation. Let's just put it that. Like we got back, and I looked at my wife on the couch, and I was like, that was our vacation that we were looking forward to all year. I was like, that was a major letdown. She was like, it was nice, but yeah, it kind of was. And like, I just wanted to be like, let's book flights to Hawaii and go to Hawaii next month. Like that's where I want to be. And the reason is I want to like just pack the kids up and go and like have that freedom and just like give them that experience. So yeah, with kids, it definitely adds a layer of like, okay, it's not even about me. Like, would I like to go to Hawaii? Of course, it'd be cool. But like, I would love to see my kids light up running into the ocean and like looking at the palm trees and like see the world through their eyes. So it gives you that extra incentive of like, what can I do for them to experience life that I didn't have growing up? And again, I was super blessed, but like we didn't do all those kind of vacations growing up, and I want to give that to my kids. So yeah, if you're listening out there and you have kids, like you don't need to look any further, in my opinion, than like what should be my purpose and reason for like going extra hard, doing that extra work and staying extra disciplined, than giving them a life that they deserve. Because I always say like, you made a decision to bring them into this world. Like they are your responsibility to take care of, love, and show a wonderful life and position them to do even better than you're doing in this life. So it's
Yeah,
great.
they're watching what you do too. So
Yep.
everything that you do, man, one of the other things, man, that I helped me turn my life around was I quit doing all the stupid crap, the
Yeah.
alcohol and drugs and all that kind of nonsense, man, and quit spending my time in places I shouldn't be in.
Yep.
And dude, it made all the difference for me when I
Yeah.
when I did that, man. You're teaching your kids whatever your habits are, good or bad, that's what your kids are learning, man. Because they don't
Yeah.
listen to our words, dude. They listen to our act, or
They
they look at
watch
our
it. Yeah.
actions.
Yep. I was just talking to my wife about this the other day. We go for like 2 or 3 family walks around. It's like a half-mile loop around our neighborhood pretty much every day, unless the weather's crappy. And I'm super into fitness and stuff. So I'm talking about like burning calories and like, eating healthy, stay healthy and strong, stay hydrated, drink water, like do all the right stuff. And the other day I said to my wife, Helen, I was like, how many kids do you think are like, 3, 5, like our 3 and our 5 year olds or 1 year olds are definitely like obviously still being pushed in a stroller. It's like, but how many 3 or 5 year olds in our culture now, like in society as American society, which is like, ugh, for the most part in a lot of ways, are like getting that kind of exercise on a daily basis. And she was like, probably not that many. And I think it was the next night we were going for a walk, and Amelia, our 3 year old, she's a little spitfire, and I adore her, and like she's high energy. And she's like, Daddy, I'm gonna run a little bit. I'm like, go for it. Like, she got her sneakers on, so she like runs all funny. And she turned around, she goes, I'm burning calories like Dad. And I like looked at my wife and I gave her a high five. I was like, last night I was asking like how many kids you think are getting like a mile and a half of exercise every day. Probably not that many. I was like, and now even like a level like deeper. I was like, how many kids, like 3 year olds, do you think understand that like exercise equals burning calories and I don't like, I would never say like count your calories, like not at all. I'm not like a psycho parent at all. But for her to understand that like healthy food makes a difference and exercise makes a difference. And those are the habits that I like from a very young age that I want her to understand. I'm like at 3 years old, she's already using lingo that like some adults still don't even understand. So I'm like, yeah, she's watching everything because I never sat down with her and was like, sweetheart, like when daddy exercises, he burns calories, like, and that's why I do it. And like, she doesn't need that verbal education from me at all. She's getting a visual education from watching it. And then I guess as I'm talking to Helen or friends or stuff like that, she's hearing these words and these cues and she's absorbing it and then regurgitating it to me. I was like, that's like, I had such a proud dad moment. I was like, my 3 year old understands that like exercise is like super healthy and she understands like the gist of it and why it is and all that stuff. I was like, yes, like we're winning. But yeah, so that's with my kids. And to your point, because you don't have kids, like everyone else is watching too. Employees, significant others, in-laws, random people on the internet, like everybody has eyeballs on them constantly. So I was like, you're either setting a good example for the rest of the world or a bad example. And that's a responsibility that I don't take lightly at all.
Great point, man, because like you said you're 40, man, so you're probably starting to see this now. Nobody knows what they're doing on this earth, man. So
Yeah.
we have to be, it's very random, dude. It's just a
Yep.
bunch of people out here on
Yep.
this rock trying to figure this thing out, I
Yep.
mean, and so it's our responsibility to take leadership role and show people the right way, man.
Yep.
And that's kind of what I've taken on. It's not
Yeah.
kind of, it is what I've
I'll
taken on
say
in
it
life.
definitely is what you've done. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome, man. Well, where can people find you if they want to? Can you work with people nationwide, or is it specific to your state, or like? Because I know
Yeah.
through Apex, I know you do phenomenal work with people. So if anyone's listening to this and they're like, "Oh shit, I could use some help with this stuff," where do people connect with you?
Yeah, most states, man, I can service so and help. So you can find me at 3bcredithealth.com is where you can go in, book a call with me personally, and I'll
Okay.
happily jump on a call. We can talk some credit if you got some credit issues. I'll talk to you about the things that we're talking about today, man. Help you any way I can, and you've heard my story, so we can talk about if you're struggling in life. I'm happy to help you any way I can.
Awesome, man. It doesn't surprise me to hear you say that because that's the kind of guy you are. Yeah. So if you're listening to this, that's not an empty, not a threat, an empty promise. Like that he's, because that's how our conversation went when the first time I met with you. It was just like, hey, let's get to know each other. It was an authentic, just get to know each other conversation. No pitches from either one of us. That's just kind of the guy Kevin is. So I appreciate it, man. Thanks for jumping on here today, sharing your story with everybody. And if you're listening to this, like I said in the beginning, please share this with someone. I think a lot of people out there are either dealing with what Kevin dealt with or have dealt with it, and maybe just want to like have some camaraderie with somebody that's been there and done that. And or I mean, we're in tough financial times right now, and a lot of people are kind of struggling with that. So if there's people that are having problems with credit and could use some financial assistance with that kind of stuff, then Kevin, I can say with a big vote of confidence based on the experience I've heard from all the other people that have used his services, is the guy to go to for stuff like that. So Kevin, man, thanks for being here. I appreciate you, brother.
Appreciate you having me, man. This has been fun, dude. We need to connect more often, man, because I
I
always
agree.
enjoy it, dude. You know, the first time we met, man, I had so much respect for you right from jump, man. I mean, you
Appreciate
really
that.
conduct yourself in a great way, man. So I wanted to share that with you, man. Mad respect, bro.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate that. And thank you everybody for watching this episode, and we will see you on the battlefield.